1980s. Like, what a time for teen sex comedies, right? I mean, we had shows such as Porky's, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Revenge of the Nerds. But today, we're going to be talking about the all-time classic, The Last American Virgin. Mainly one character in particular, and why I feel he does not deserve any sympathy. Why do I think that? Well, let's break it down. Written and directed by Boaz Davidson, The Last American Virgin is the American version of the Israeli film Lemon Popsicle, also known in some places as Hot Bubblegum. The gist of the story is about a teenage boy named Gary, played by Lawrence Monsoon, who one night while meeting up with his friend, his eye catches a hold of the beautiful new girl, Karen, played by Diane Franklin. From that point on, Gary makes it his mission to try to get with Karen because he is so smitten with her. When he finds out where she lives, he purposely flattens the tire on her moped so he can use it as an excuse to drive her to school. When they make it, he then invites her to a party, but she rejects him, saying that she's busy that night. But on the night of the party, when Gary shows up, she's there with his best friend, Rick, who's the bad boy of the bunch, whose mission is only to get laid. From that point on, Gary spends the majority of the movie moping around sadly because he longs for Karen, who is madly in love with bad boy Rick. She's so madly in love that one night at the football stadium, she lets him take her virginity. Not only does Rick take Karen's virginity, but in the process, he gets her pregnant, which leads to him dumping her. Now, being the love-stricken nice guy, Gary then picks a fight with Rick before taking upon himself to help Karen get an abortion by pawning a lot of his stuff and getting a loan from his boss at the pizza party that it works for. He then puts Karen up in his grandparents' cottage during the time they were supposed to be on a ski trip in order for her to heal up so her parents wouldn't know about the pregnancy. During that time one night, Karen thanks Gary for being a great friend during her time of need, and it's then where Gary finally confesses his love for her, to which she responds by kissing him. Time goes by and Karen's 18th birthday comes around. Gary is seen buying a locket at a jeweler and has him inscribed to Karen with love on it. When he goes to the party all ecstatic because he feels like he's finally won the love of his life, he enters the kitchen and his life is crushed because there stood Karen making out and embracing bad boy Rick. She took him back. Gary then leaves the party, gets back in his car, and drives away, tears rolling down his face as the credits roll to the song, Just Once. Now, when I first saw this film, I was like anybody else, man. Poor Gary, and Karen was such a bitch. Hell, even Diane Franklin said that she still gets heat for her Karen role to this day. And there was even a time where she wanted to change the script to where her and Gary actually got together. But Boaz Davidson refused. Mainly because this was actually the story of his life at that age. Now you may be asking, okay, but why did you title this Gary Gets No Sympathy? Well, here's why. Like I said earlier, when I first watched this movie, I was greatly sympathetic towards Gary, mainly because I was putting myself in his shoes and thinking about my past experiences at the time. But when I rewatched this movie later on as time went by, and I started analyzing it, and then not only just putting myself in Gary, but in Karen's shoes as well, that's when I realized that Gary deserves no sympathy, because of these reasons mainly right here. Number one, their first meeting. At the beginning of the movie, when Gary first sees Karen and she notices him back, she smiles, and then she waits for him to speak. But instead of speaking, he just stands there staring at her, drooling like some creep, until finally Karen gives him that look and goes about her way. You see, Gary should have said something right then and there, even if it was just a simple hi. No, that's a lot of problem people have to this day right now, man. See, people are so afraid of rejection that you'd rather stand back and watch somebody who you want to be with just pass you by. No, they have a saying for that right there. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So, shoot your shot. Number 2, the party. Another reason Gary gets no sympathy is when he asked Karen to the party and she says she was busy that night, but shows up with Rick instead. Not only does she show up at the same party he invited her to, but when Rick introduces them, she treats it like it's no big deal, you know? Now, any other female in that situation would have been feeling awkward as hell. Now, this should have been the ultimate red flag to Gary, showing him that Karen was not interested. It couldn't have been any clearer. But since Gary is so stricken, and of course, you know, you can chalk this up to him being an inexperienced virgin, he kept pursuit. Third reason Gary gets no sympathy from me is his treatment of Rose. So after he sees that Karen blew him off to go to the party with Rick, Karen then introduces him to her best friend Rose. Now, Rose is practically the female version of Gary in this movie, because as soon as she sees him, she is instantly infatuated him and spends all of her time in the movie trying to hook up with him. But because Gary's eyes are so laser focused on Karen, he ignores Rose at the time, and at many times treats her like she's annoying. And Rose, who is played by Kimmy Robinson, she wasn't a bad looking girl in the movie. You know, yeah, they did portray her as Karen's nutty looking friend so she wouldn't show up Diane Franklin's character. But when you actually look at it, she was quite cute. And Gary didn't even see it. And most of all, he didn't even see that the way that Karen was treating him, he was doing to Rose. Actually, you know, I take that back. Unlike Karen, who was oblivious to Gary's crush on her, Gary obviously knew Rose had a crush on him, and yet he completely ignored her and treated her horrible. Reason number 4, why he helped Karen. Like how I mentioned earlier, after Rick sleeps with Karen and knocks her up, he dumps her, and Gary swoops in and helps her get an abortion. A lot of people would argue that this shows how much he loved her because he helped her out in her time of need. But actually, think about it. The only reason Gary so much as lifted a finger to help because it was Karen. And since he was trying to get somewhere with her, he thought that by doing this, he would. Because had Karen been some random girl Rick had knocked up and, you know, things like that, and he didn't have a crush on her, Gary probably would have ignored it and called the girl stupid. He only did this because it was Karen and he thought it was going to get him somewhere. And it almost did. So that's why, when it comes to The Last American Virgin, Gary gets no sympathy from me. Now, if I was going to sympathize for him anywhere, it would have been at the party when he sees Karen taking Rick back. This was done after he confessed his love for her. But other than that, I'm totally unsympathetic for him. Because there were too many signs, man. Too many signs that Karen wasn't into him. But let me know what you think, you know? Hit me up in the comments section. Do you agree, disagree, or do you have your own theories right there? And while you're at it, don't forget to do those things. Like, share, and subscribe. This is D. Wayne saying until next time, as always, we's out.